And the floor is yours, David.
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have everybody back. Real excited about the first session. So hopefully we can keep that going with this one. And we're very honored to have Paul Devereux with us to discuss the emergence of, these kind of ideas from the natural environment. Paul's done a lot of on-the-ground field research, from everything from ley lines to he's now studying some of the monolithic structures, and they found that they actually have a resonant tone, some of them. So he's doing some research in that. And I believe, Paul, you were just on that, correct?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about that real quickly? Because I think that's an interesting...
Well, my thing is sacred geography rather than geometry, although there are sacred geometry comes into it. But I'm looking, well, I have been for the last 40 years at ancient sites, their placement in the landscapes. We deconstructed the ley theory 20 years ago, but we've been looking at alignments, and currently we're looking at the acoustics of ancient sites. In fact, in June, we've got permission to go into Stonehenge, where we'll be testing the acoustics of the actual stones. Nobody's done this before, because we found that in the Preseli area of south west Wales, where the blue stones of Stonehenge were originated, about 200 miles from where Stonehenge is, that landscape is highly resonant. It's lithophonic. At least between 10 and 40% of the stones are musical. They ring if you percuss them. And we've been studying that in great detail, and we've been doing it with the Royal College of Art, amongst other sources. So that's the thing, and we're just looking at ancient sites in all sorts of different ways, but it's acoustics at the moment.
Which is, I think that in the first session, we kind of talked about how integral these theories are. And I think your research really points to that. You know what I mean? You're dealing with the different aspects that go beyond just the architecture and the actual experience that people have at these sites, and the reason that they're, tying it to the actual natural structures and that, and the environment. Well,
you can link the two together very well in the ancient Egyptian temples, for example, where they have stelae, the monuments, the pillars of granite. Granite is very lithophonic. It's radioactive as well, but that's beside the point. And there's a fallen monolith in the Karnak temple, and if you hit it, it rings. And each of the temples up the Nile have a different height to each one of these stelae, and we think they all give off different notes, different sounds. Now, Goethe said that architecture was frozen music,
right?
And we, I think that might be literally true with the Egyptian temples, where the word geometry comes from. Of course, earth measure. They measured out the ground using cord and stakes, and so the idea of measuring the earth came really from a sacred act of creating the ground plan for a temple. I listened to much, not all, but much of the previous webinar, which was fascinating. Well done, Randall. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Paul.
But there's a couple of things I'd like to pick up on, if I may.
Yeah, please.
That I just like to go into. One is the question whether sacred geometry is invention or not. And Randall quite correctly said it's not invention, it's the human mind discerning the fundamental patterns of the universe, the patterns of growth, the patterns of motion, everything that underlies the manifest material universe is encoded in this geometry. So sacred geometry is just our perception of it, the human mind's perception of it. So it's not an invention. And there's an image up here now of the Great Pyramid. And if this image, we've got a lot of feedback going on here.
I'm pretty clear. I can hear
You're
pretty
clear, okay. I've got Mickey Mouse talking in my ear, but never mind.
No, I hear it as well. It sounds like a squeak. Actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Randall, that might be coming off your end.
I can't say for sure. I'm hearing it. I don't know what I would be doing that would be causing it, unless I'm thinking too loudly.
That's a TV effects going on.
Anyway, this is something I thought I'd pick up on, because unless I missed it, Randall put up a couple of diagrams, but his speech was moving so fast, I don't think it got explored. And there's an aspect of it I'd like to mention, because it's always fascinated me and explains this curiously associative nature of sacred geometry. If we take the Great Pyramid, ancient site, could we have the next one, please? Next picture. And you saw that, and Randall explained about this, how you can build your own Great Pyramid using straight edge and compass. Could we have the next, please? The ground plan elevation of the Great Pyramid with its 51-degree, 51-minute face angles, if that is placed just across a square, which you can think of, I'm approaching this in a different way, think of as the plan of the Great Pyramid, and you have a radius that I've dotted in there, and swing a circle from that. Could we have the next? You get that circle there, which can be produced in a number of ways, the squaring of the circle. And you can produce it also by, first of all, starting with a Pythagorean 3-4-5 triangle and producing a square of one side, as you see there. And then from that, another Pythagorean triangle, you see at the top there. And that gives you a baseline that then can be developed or produced into a square. We have that circle, and the radius is from the center of the big square to the center of that little square. I won't go into all the proportions and ratios, but the interesting thing to me about this figure, apart from the geometry per se, is in the next picture, please, Jeremy. Thank you. If you then draw a circle inside both those squares, the big square and the little square, you have got the pretty exact ratios between the disk of the Earth and the disk of the Moon. And to me, it's all struck me extraordinary that that should be the case, because somebody else asked, is sacred geometry universal? Well, the point is, you could be, a blobby alien on a spaceship in a far galaxy, and you could draw that geometry and it would give you material information about our planet and our Earth. Our planet and our moon. And to me, it's remarkable that a piece of geometry gives some hard, rocky information like that. And you can develop this thing a bit further then, and it moves you into synchronicity, and sacred geometry and gematria, and these systems are perfect for studying the things we cannot study with our linear logic. So, for example, I remember in 1999, I was in a ship that was circling in the English Channel, and we were watching the total eclipse of the sun. And any of you who have seen this will know how awesome it is. We may be 21st century people with all our science and whatever, but it's still primal. It's a primal experience to see the sun blocked out, and all you see is that fiery rim around the edge. Now, what's interesting to me is that that is literally an astronomical coincidence, because the moon is a hell of a lot smaller than the sun. It's about 400 times smaller in diameter, but the sun is 400 times further away than the moon is from us. And that coincidence means that the disk of the moon can more or less exactly block out the disk of the sun. Now, there's something like, I don't know, 62 or more satellites in the solar system, and that doesn't happen. That wouldn't happen anywhere else for various reasons. So this astronomical coincidence occurs where the only known sentient life, if we pass for that, us, can see it. So there is an eye to see this remarkable astronomical coincidence. And that relationship is indicated in the sacred geometry. So suddenly you're moving sideways into really deep water, because the whole question of synchronicity, of apparently meaningful coincidence, is a deep area itself that's never been properly explored. C.G. Jung said, that he was amazed how many people had noticed it and how little was said about it. And that remains really the case to this day, although we do talk a little bit more about it, but the implications are enormous. So to me, that particular figure, the interlocking circles, the vesica piscis, the triangular shape you can draw from that is the ground level elevation of the Great Pyramid, and how that tells you many things in the Great Pyramid. But it can tell you this piece of factual astronomical information of the relationship between the disk of the Earth and the disk of the Moon. And it's the ratios, of course, that always count in sacred geography. So I just wanted to pick up on that one particular point.
Can I interject?
Interject, Randall.
Well, you just said a key principle. It's the ratio that counts. And I might mention that if you take the solar distance and set it as a ratio to the solar diameter, it's 108. If you set the lunar distance to the lunar diameter, it also is 108, which is interesting because that's one of the core numbers that they have built this numerical cosmology on that we find so redundant throughout these various systems, from Kabbalah to the Vedas and so on.
Yeah, the geometria, yeah.
Yes, so that number...
Can I just interject with you for a minute? Because 1080 is the number of miles that is the radius of the lunar disk.
Yes, yes. So that number 108, and of course it's also the atomic weight of silver, which is traditionally associated with the moon. So yeah. There are these numerous coincidences in these connections and interconnections here that raise questions in my mind about what do we actually mean by coincidence.
Yes. Well, it's synchronicity. There's a deeper meaning there, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
There was something else just to pick up that you sparked me up on when I was listening to you previously. The idea of the age, the origins of this esoteric knowledge, which is basically what it is. And one of the things that I thought of was something Keith Critchlow came up with, that in the Neolithic, the New Stone Age that you mentioned, never mind the ancient sites, the structures themselves, there were these things, these stone balls. If I can show one, see if you can see one of these things. Can you see that?
Yes.
He found in a drawer in a museum back room a drawer marked Scotland, and he pulled it open. There were all these small stone balls that you could hold in your hand that had been found in various Neolithic contexts in Scotland, and they were a sequence, and there's about 100 of them found now, that between them all, some are just misshapen lumps, but some are clearly geometrical solids. You know, dodecahedrons, icosahedrons, and all the rest of it are all there in these handheld objects, the purpose for which nobody knows, but they've been found at these sites. So even back in the Neolithic, you could perhaps picture an esoteric knowledge that's being passed down by the priestly cults of those particular societies. So certainly the perception of the building blocks of creation, which is sacred geometry, has been perceived at least for 5,000 years, and probably a lot earlier than that.
Yeah, those balls clearly showed, as I recall, dodecahedrons, most of the Platonic solids, didn't they?
In fact, all the Platonic solids, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is pretty amazing. Just picking again, I'm just picking up on points you've made, and really follows the same thread of there being an esoteric knowledge that's passed down through many different cultures and ages and societies. And you'd mentioned and gave some examples of Gothic cathedrals where the geometry is inherent within them. And this seems to have been the way that the esoteric knowledge holders passed on knowledge. Mm-hmm. They were, who said it? The Gothic cathedrals were books of stone.
Victor
and one
Hugo.
initiate, who said that?
Victor Hugo.
Right. Well, they are books of stone, and any initiate could go into, say, Chartres Cathedral, and he'd be able to read it. The knowledge was there. Little things that anybody to this day can see. You know, on the west front of Chartres Cathedral, you've got your two spires going up, and the north one, the left-hand one, as you're looking at it from outside, is the solar tower. It's 365 feet tall. The southern tower is the lunar tower. It's 28 feet shorter, the days of a lunar month. And on top of each one of these is a weather vane. And on the taller one, there is an image of the sun. And on top of the smaller one is a crescent moon built in. So the knowledge is deeply there. And of course, as you all know, Randall, that the knowledge that's in Chartres Cathedral is colossal. Every inch of it is significant, and it's passing on information for those that have the ability to read that information.
Yes, and my feeling is that we've only just begun to scratch the surface of what's there. I mean, well,
we don't think like that, you see, as a culture. We have linear thinking. And sacred geometry, and particularly gematria, is non-linear thinking. It's a different way of thinking altogether. So that, you know, in geometric numerology, for example, you can actually describe a figure of sacred geometry just using the gematria. So you can write geometry as well. In the ancient Hebrew or Greek or whatever. So this is a multi-level, deeply associative system of knowledge, of which sacred geometry is one aspect, but it links into a much broader way of mentation, of non-linear thinking. And it's something we're not used to, and that's why we're just discovering it like the blind man and the elephant, really. We're just picking up a piece here and a piece there, but hopefully one day we will have the whole image. and then maybe we can start thinking in different and hopefully better ways.
Yes. Let me elaborate just a little bit on that, on the gematria. For those who don't really know what that is, I think we did talk about that a little bit last week, but the idea there is that prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system in the Semitic languages, for example, Greek and Hebrew, probably the two most prominent, the letters, the symbols had a dual meaning. They were both letters of the alphabet representing phonetic sounds, but they were also numerical values. So what that meant was that you could translate the names and the words and the phrases found in various sacred writings according to their numerical values. And when you do that, you end up with this very interesting system of numerical correspondences that leads you directly into the realm of geometry, suggesting that underlying, the parables and the stories and the moral teachings and so on, there's this
Looks like Randall stalled out. So we'll get him back online soon. I'm squeaking. My mic is the squeak cause, so I'm kind of.
Ah, okay.
That's why
We've got the culprits.
Yeah. So, I'm the tech issue today. We'll see. And then Randall should be back soon. That was a good. If anybody's interested, I believe Orson Welles in a movie called F is for Fake has a really amazing monologue about Chartres. So check that out. I think it's on YouTube. But it's Orson Welles waxing poetic on the beauty of Chartres and the information that it holds. So
I could just mention that that's just one example of how the knowledge was passed on secretly. Another good example is the Chapel of Charlemagne in the 8th, 9th century at Aachen, and it's an octagonal chapel. It has some very interesting light phenomena with the sun in different positions sending beams of light through. But to me, what was interesting about that, he got his knowledge from a Yorkshire man called Alcuin. And Alcuin was known throughout that Europe of his day as a great holder of ancient knowledge. And Alcuin gave Charlemagne this information with which he could build his chapel. That is, it's absolutely reeking with sacred geometry and esoteric bits and pieces. So that's what, 500, 600 years before even Chartres. So this thing was being passed on with different cultures, different places, different ways. The ground plans of some of the stone circles of the Neolithic also have a lot of geometric properties. Professor Alexander Thom was somebody who had surveyed this. And it's always interesting to think of Stonehenge and those ring of lintel stones when they had been complete. You've got these great uprights, about 4 meters tall, and you've got the lintel stones around the tops that are fixed into position with the mortise and tenon joints in stone, and each one is gently curved. So when they were all present, it would be a perfect circle of stone held up 14 feet in the air or whatever. And this isn't accidental. This is a people who are constructing a very precise instrument. And it tells you that stuff was being carried on through untold generations. But how far back it goes is another question, of course.
I think Richard Merrick is actually going to be talking about Rosslyn Chapel and the psychoacoustic properties.
Yes.
They're finding in there, and that's what's interesting about the resonant stones in that. There's the legend of the eternal choirs. Is that correct? With that, there's the legend of like the fairy choirs in that in Britain.
Well, the eternal choir system was based on white-leafed oak in the Malvern Hills in central England. And the idea was that there was a circle in the landscape, as it were, and different cathedrals, different churches would be a choir there would be singing, and then another one would take it up, and then another, and then another. I'm not sure how actual that is, but it's a lovely idea, I must say.
Yeah, it is a beautiful, and it's one of those things where, you know, whether it's actual or not, there's a potential for it too, even in the future.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
using these ideas and bringing it forward. You know.
Yeah. If you like, it's a bit tricky this, but I could tell you how I got really into sacred geometry, if you like. I have written about it. It's in 2 or 3 books, but it involves a remarkable experience I had in 1967, which dates me, and it was May the 16th. I remember it every year, of course, because it was something that had a great and profound effect on me. And I'm a painter, and I was at art college, an art college just south of London, near a place called Bromley, but it was out in the country. We were on the 4th floor of the college, and it was getting towards evening, but there was still sunlight, very late, sort of twilight, late afternoon. And I went over to a window to mix up some paints because I didn't want to switch the studio lights on. And something caught my attention, and I looked up to the north, and from the north, through the sky, was this orange light coming, and it came closer and closer to the college. And I just couldn't believe it. It was a perfect rectangle, glowing in the colors like the embers of a fire. And it came to a halt several hundred feet above a field near the college, and we were looking up at it through the window. At least I was looking up at it, and I shouted to other people who were still working in the studio to come to the window. And they said, "Oh, Devereux, what is it? I want to go." And I shouted at them with real panic in my voice, urgency at least. And they came over, and their jaws dropped. And by now, people coming out on the car lot at the bottom below us and looking up, about 24 people saw this, but it was a rectangle of, it looked like orange fire, only it was perfectly delineated. It had 90-degree corners. It was absolutely perfect piece of geometry glowing in the sky. And it then later broke down and moved around on itself and reformed into, it's a bit embarrassing this, but it happened. It's the truth. It reformed into a glowing outline of a figure. And to me, it was something that should have come out of some biblical text, not something I should be looking at near Bromley in Kent. But anyway, it did this, and then it collapsed in on itself. And I realized that I'd been looking at a root 5 rectangle, which is the shape of a door. It's like an upright door shape. And a door is roughly root 5 because that relates to the sacred geometry of the human body. And we are that shape. And so we have doors that shape to go through. But it had a profound effect on me. Other people had seen things we found the next morning, had seen it from different angles, and also there'd been another sighting of something. And I hasten to add, I wasn't on LSD or anything at the time. I had been a year earlier, but not that time, because we were working towards our diploma shows. And somebody said, "Oh, you've seen a flying saucer, a UFO." But to me, this was some other sort of phenomenon. Anyway, it had such a profound effect on me that I had a mental breakdown shortly afterwards, because I couldn't believe what I'd seen, but other people saw it as well. So I couldn't believe in them either. And I thought I was inventing everything. And it lasted for about 6 weeks, and I came out of it. and I adjusted, and it's one of the things I live with. That happened. I saw it. Other people saw it. It was an impossible event that happened objectively in the sky on May the 16th, 1967, near Bromley in Kent. And it was that set me off on the whole area of research and interest that I've followed ever since, and sacred geometry was part of that. But being an art student, I understood what the root rectangles were, and I knew what I'd seen, and it was very, very dramatic. So you don't get a better teaching than that.
Well, it's fascinating too, because I think that there must be something in the UK, because I've heard a number of people, you know, there's a band, Killing Joke. They just played a couple of shows, and I've spoke with them a couple times, and that was one of the things I think that led them into some of their investigations as well, was that they saw something in the sky that had geometric resonance, you know, and it was
Really?
very similar to what you're describing. So
yeah. You can't really talk about it very much, but here I am talking about it. But as I say, I have written about this because whatever else, I'm a blabbermouth, and if there was any intelligence in that, they knew I'd talk and write about it. And I have. I mean, to me, it makes, whenever I get too materialistic, or whenever people tell me that no, none of this stuff is true, I only have to think of that, and that it sets my compass again, that we're looking into some very, very deep stuff. And one of the reasons I go back into the ancient world, into sacred geography, which is more all-encompassing, but the sacred geometry is a part of that. But the whole thing about the landscape and ancient knowledge and so on comes into that. And I'm looking there for the clues, if you like, of who saw what when, and what do we really understand or not understand. Have we lost Randall?
no, I think is Randall paused? No, you're there.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Randall, and you look into the geology as well.
Yeah, certainly, to some extent. I was just commiserating there with Paul's experience and thinking about similar types of experiences back in that day. How funny how so many of us were led into these avenues of research, you know, roughly around the same time.
Yeah.
Due to various experiences. I certainly had my share of experiences. I attribute a lot of this, most likely, and I'll come out of the closet here and say that my experiments with peyote back in the late 60s led me into sort of a realization of the geometric structure of the natural world.
Yes.
And I could recount some experiences, but certainly that element played a big part in reevaluating the architecture of our reality that we inhabit. I think many of us were led down that pathway to begin to question the paradigms that had been inculcated into us by the educational system that has a vested interest in impressing upon us a certain worldview, a certain understanding of reality, which basically precludes questioning to any serious extent. But there were so many things that Paul was saying in there that I kept resonating with. His reference to the root 5 rectangle, which of course brings in the whole subject of dynamic symmetry. And I've done some interesting work on metrology. I'm sure you have too, Paul, on the links between geometry and systems of measurement that were used throughout the ancient world.
Yes, yeah.
And we've certainly seen enough evidence, I think, to suggest that we could certainly hypothesize the existence of a universal system of metrology. When you were talking about the lintels at Stonehenge, referring back to John Michel's work, he gave the average length of those lintels drawn on the center line, which would have been basically right over the mortise and tenon joints that link the lintels to the uprights. And he gave that at 10.56 feet. And so, of course, if there were originally 30 lintels, then you would do the 30 times the 10.56, and that would give you the 316.8 feet. That shows up in the diagram that's up on the screen right now, that being the perimeter of the square drawn on the Earth as well as the circle. But what's interesting is if you go back into the work of we're having a few things popping up on the screen here that are distracting me. Hang on one second. Okay. H.E. Berryman, are you familiar with his work at all on historic metrology? I know that John Michel did reference him several times in his work. I believe this is where I encountered the Sumerian units of measurement. And you probably know that some of these, like the Sumerian units, the Greek units, they would oftentimes have dual systems. So that in Sumeria they had two lengths for the foot, as did the Greeks. Essentially, one associated with the masculine foot and one with a feminine foot. In stone, in the shorter of the Sumerian feet was 10.56 inches. So now what's interesting about that is that makes the lintel stones exactly 12 of the shorter Sumerian feet. If there were in fact 30 lintels, then the 30 times 12 is 360. So that implies that center line that the sarsen stone circle was placed upon, and which yields associated with the diagram that's up on the screen right now, then 360 degrees of that, each degree was precisely a Sumerian foot of 10.56 inches. Now, I find that fascinating to me that a Sumerian foot would show up so elegantly in the dimensions of Stonehenge. But I don't know to what extent you had the opportunity to look into some of the monumental earthworks and mound structures in America. Have you ever had a chance yet to investigate?
I've been widely in America, yeah. I've looked at the New England samples. I've been to the amazing effigy mounds in the northern Midwest states. My main interest in the Americas actually has been the straight line features, the linear features.
Yes, which are being found there. Have you heard of the Great Hopewell Road?
Oh yeah, 60-mile road across Ohio. Chillicothe leads down to that. Yeah, I've not been in South America, but I've worked up from the Yucatan up through Mexico and up through the United States and into Canada, tracing these ground markings. And they're remarkable. And there's a big secret being told there about the background to American populations. There's definitely a body of knowledge was passed right through the Americas.
Absolutely.
But I looked at some of the mounds. Were they, storage facilities, or were they astronomical features? In New England, I'm not so sure, but of course the great mounds of Ohio and that region were clearly marvelous geometrical forms, tremendously exact, and straight roads and so on and so forth. And of course, these have been found exactly similar in the Amazon basin now, with unfortunately the clearance of trees, but the addition of radar technology. They're finding hundreds of these things. That obviously was a great civilization that once occupied the Amazon basin, but it was older, much older than the Hopewell people, for example, of Ohio. But the other thing I think we need to talk about there is, and something you've just touched on really, Randall, is that a lot of these people, it's not politically correct to say so, but a lot of these people took hallucinogens of various sorts. In fact, virtually all of them, the Hopewell people did, for example. We even had ritual copper-covered wooden effigies of mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and so on. And I think when people go into those deep trance states, mind-altered states, you touch the archetypes. You actually you see the geometry. You live the geometry. You're inside the fractal patterns of the universe, if you like. And I think that would have sensitized their minds to geometry, as perhaps ours were in the 60s, and to certain events and connections and associations. So I don't think you can take out the expanded, altered mind states from the manifest knowledge that was left in their monuments and their earthworks and their great straight ritual roads.
I agree.
And we know, for example, that the Kogi Indians of northern, I'm having a senior moment, never mind. They see their roads, the old Tyronas straight roads, in their territory, and they are people who were the ancestors of the Kogi Indians. They say that the roads are physical traces of spirit ways in a lunar, the spirit world that's superimposed on the physical world, and they can travel along the roads in their bodies, but they can also travel along the actual spirit roads in trance states, and that's a living tradition. So we pretty much know what was going on. It's a spiritual landscape, a spirit geography that's been projected, or if you like, built onto, laminated onto the physical topography.
That's an interesting word to say, laminated. Yes. Hey, did you get a chance to spend any time in the American Southwest, particularly in the area of the Chacoan culture?
Oh, yes. I've been to Chaco Canyon several times. Good. It's very difficult now to see the Chaco roads. In fact, I've got a picture here of these, but I'll go through that in a sequence in a minute. But I tell you, here's a good tip. The Chaco roads, which, are up to 30 feet wide, and some of them are multiple, So you've got 30-foot wide road next to another 30-foot wide road next to another. Extraordinary, runs for tens of miles, perhaps more than that even, into neighboring states, left by the Anasazi people, the ancient ones, who were at the height of their culture, probably about 1100 AD, and disappeared by about 1400 as a culture. Probably became Pueblo Indians and so on. Anyway, and these great roads, these are people who had neither horse nor the wheel, stretch out. And at the beginning of the 20th century, they were still visible to some extent, but the way the weather's gone and agriculture and so on, they more or less disappeared. But if you stand on the northern rim rock of Chaco Canyon, looking north, just before the sun sets, suddenly these hollows, that is all that's left of these roads now, and which in the full daylight are very difficult to see, suddenly they become shadows, and you see these shadow paths running right across the whole desert. And it's a tremendous dramatic thing. It only lasts for a few moments, and you just have to catch it. But it's very dramatic. Yes, I have. I've Chaco Canyon, and I tell you, you're talking about the foot. One of my favorite places, most powerful places, is a very remote area called Pony Hills in the southern New Mexico desert, and it's just a rocky ridge. It looks like nothing till you get up to it. But then you see there are pools, rock pools of crystal clear ice cold water in the middle of this arid landscape. Marvelous. And there's rock art all over the place. And a lot of the rock art are footprints carved in the base rock. And they're bigger than a human, well, I say bigger than my foot, for example. And some of them are bear prints, because these were bear shamans, obviously collected here. And there's a whole geometry that's actually carved into the rocks there. Hardly anybody ever goes. It's barely been researched yet. And they've also got musical rocks, I should say, David. They've got lithophones at some of their sacred places and their vision quest sites and so on. So yeah, I've done a lot of work down there on different levels, different aspects.
Really quickly with the acoustic rocks and that, if you guys have a chance, check out Paul's website on the project. They have Zev, who he's a really talented drummer, doing some of the sound samples and that. So it's a very cool project. Definitely, if you have an opportunity, we'll put a link in the email that goes out. But it's an awesome project. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you.
May I attempt to put an image up on the screen with my laptop? This may work. Let's see if this works. Is this working? Can you see this?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, it does work. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have put in, this is showing, I've added the red lines to try to bring them out. This is showing the Chaco and Road system, and there's a couple of them here. As you say, there's actually 5 roads that converge on, that have been identified so far that converge on Chaco Canyon. It appears that Chaco was the hub of this whole complex of sacred geography that extended over the whole 10,000 square miles of the San Juan Basin. And the roads generally lead to outliers and signal towers. Did you get a chance to explore around the area at all at some of the signal towers?
Yeah, I trace some of the roads on the ground. Jeremy, we've got the Corpse Road picture up. Could we flick through a few of those? Because I've got some of Chaco Canyon down towards right at the end, actually, I think. Very near the end. This is a whole other thing that David mentioned to me, wanted to bring up, but it's really another subject. Keep on going. Oh, there we go. Very good, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so on the left-hand black and white picture, you see those markings that have been arrowed are parts of this road system, and they come into what would have been a little wall, a gap in a wall, and the structure you see is Pueblo Alto. In Chaco Canyon, it seems to have been a ritual center that people came to at certain points in the year, and they're tremendous ruins, and this is just on top of the rim rock, and all the northern roads came in alongside it, and there were doorways on the side of Pueblo Alto that opened out onto the road system as it went by, but still we don't know what it was really all about. And they rate, and on the right-hand side, you see a plan of some of the roads coming into or going out of Chaco Canyon, however you view it. But now, in fact, they've been traced much further around. And not only that, but Chaco Canyon is on the exact same meridian as a place called Aztec to the north, which was an Anasazi site. And it's also on a meridian that goes down into northern Mexico. Dead true meridian, these places. And there's road systems around them all. But on the other hand, if you go to Zacatecas in northern Mexico, there's a whole other system around a citadel there that probably dates to 300 or 400 years before the Chaco phenomenon. And in fact, if you date these road systems, the oldest seem to be in South America, perhaps now in the Amazon basin, and the more recent ones are up in what is today's United States. So it's a deep phenomenon, and I've gone into this a lot in my own work. I've written several books on this, and we're still working on it. It's a great mystery, and it seems to relate to this idea of them being physical expressions of roads in the spirit world, if you like, in what the Kogi call a Luna. And we're finding it in Europe, and we're finding different types of vestiges. Could we go back a few, Jeremy, a few things here? Yeah, go on back. We found what the origin of ley lines were. There's these death roads, the old Hell Way and so on, that we've been working on. There's a whole divinatory system in late medieval times. Could we go back a bit? And then if you go into prehistory, you've got these stone roads on Dartmoor in France and elsewhere. And back again one. There was this thing called a cursus, the big black line, which runs near London Heathrow Airport there. It dwarfs, the size of it dwarfs the runways there. You can't now see it. It's been mapped by technological means. Can you go back one more? Now, in the 18th century, William Stukeley noticed one of these big, they're earthen avenues. Nobody knows what happened. There's nothing in them. They're up to a mile or 2 miles long in many cases. They're either straight or straight in sections, and they link places of burial. And there's one just to the north of Stonehenge itself, and William Stukeley called it a cursus, Latin for a race course, but they're Neolithic. And they're just these earthen avenues, mainly visible now as crop marks. On the right there, you can see the crop markings of the Scorton cursus in Yorkshire, and it goes right off the top of the photograph there, and you see its geometrical exactitude. And again, it links places of burial, as do the stone rows that I just showed you.
Are you familiar with Claude Lecateau's work? I may be saying that completely wrong. He's a medievalist, a French medievalist that's looked at the folk traditions that are still existent in some parts of Spain and that, where the people actually reenact the burial processions in their towns, and they, you know, the one I'm thinking of in Spain is called the Society of the Bone, and there's a whole folk tradition around that that's still somewhat evident, at least in the archival writings and that.
Well, in one of the books I wrote, I linked this to processional ways, chiefly ceremonial ways. The idea of a ruler, which has a very deep Indo-European root, and we use it to mean a king or whatever, a leader, and also a straight edge. And the two things it's like the straightness in some way indicated power or something other than the normal physical world. And we're pretty sure that these cursus features, they date to about 2,000-3,000 BC, were spirit roads linked to the places of burial. And then we trace that up through Anglo-Saxon medieval times to these corpseways carrying the dead. Could we go back another one, Jeremy, in case I've got... Yeah, this is all charms to stop the spirits getting into the house, to binding spirits. Next one back, please. Lovely doing this backwards, isn't it? Feng Shui in China, the wind-water system of geomancy, and straight features in the landscape were abhorred by them because they said troublesome spirits passed along. Could we go back, pass along these things? Oh, this is I can't do this backwards. Next one back, please. This is a real fairy story about a fairy tree in Ireland that was under threat of destruction, but was saved. And you can see there on the left there it was in its pristine glory. And fairies used to rest and congregate under that tree. But then they started to put a big road through towards the town of Ennis, and you can see I ringed the tree there during the road works. And a local storyteller, Eddie Lenihan, who I know well, he managed to prove, because he'd been recording things for years, it was actually a heritage feature, and they couldn't destroy it. So in the end, they made the road bend to go around it, and they put this fence you just saw around the tree to protect it. There's a lot more to that story, but never mind. Could we go back again? Yeah, so we're dealing here with virtual straight ways, spirit ways. Fairy paths are one of them, and they link certain places, one of them being these things called fairy forts, which were prehistoric and early historic dwelling areas. This is the famous one there, the Assard in Kiltimar in County Mayo. Many fairy stories about this place. Fairies go in a straight line, gliding as it were within a short distance of the ground. Could we go back one more? Yeah, so they're virtual spirit roads as well as these physical features. In Germany, there was the Geisterwecker, which are spirit roads, which were invisible, but they linked actual material cemeteries. And so in the folk mind, the people who lived in these areas knew where these roads were, even though you couldn't see them. And you would never be caught on them at night because spirits moved up and down them. And they were dead straight, went over mountains and valleys in a straight line. So there's something about the idea of spirits moving in straight lines through the landscape. Could we have an earlier one, Jeremy? Yeah, in Holland, they had these things called doodwagen with great straight roads. They were corpseways for carrying the dead, but they were also haunted by spirits and in the folk mind. And they're called doodwagen or death roads, and also spoken wagon, spook or ghost roads, showing that spirit lore was indeed attached to them. And the next, please, back. Sorry about this, Jeremy. There's another one. The British weren't quite as accurate as this, but the Dutch, they have special surveyors who came out every year to measure them and make sure they were kept straight and to a certain width. And a system of divination came developed along these roads by people called precursors. And these were seers who could see spectral cortèges coming down these roads, and they foretold of somebody's death. This was the folklore. And if we could just go back one more or two more. Yeah, this is it. We know that this was the belief in Elizabethan England because, as we see here, Shakespeare mentions it in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now it is the time of night that the graves all gaping wide, everyone lets forth his sprite in the churchway paths to glide. Another name for these ritual roads, death roads, were churchway paths. So there's a whole body of stuff, and again, I've written a whole book on all this stuff. And this stuff came out of the early work on ley lines, ley hunting. And we found that the guy who came up with it was called Alfred Watkins. He had nothing to do with energy alignments or any of this other stuff you read these days. And we discovered that what he was photographing and so on were the remnants of these old corpse ways. And he would have loved to have known that, I'm sure. But that was back in the 1920s he was doing that. So my guess, it's only a guess, is that when humanity moved out of Africa, we know now from the genetic markers that people sort of went into Central Europe and milled around for a few thousand years and then went in all directions out of there. They dispersed. And to my mind, the straight lines you see in the Americas are linked to these spirit roads and death roads we find in Europe. It's the same fundamental idea that's filtered through different cultures and different societies over many, many centuries. So the idea that spirits could move and the spirits move in straight lines can be hindered by curvilinear lines, by knots and so on, and labyrinths. it's pretty universal, east and west. So it looks like it might be a very, very ancient idea altogether. And again, a lot of these people, certainly the earlier people, were taking strange substances. So it's it's an intriguing area, and it doesn't directly link with sacred geometry, but it's geometrical markings on the ground that took on cultural significance, linked with death and with spirits, and I think it's all part of a parcel.
I think we should say that when we look at, we're looking at remnants of a system that included sacred geometry, sacred geography, an understanding of astronomy, and something you haven't touched upon yet, Paul, is the connection between, I think, some of these roadways and astronomical alignments.
Yes, yes.
Which brings in, of course, a whole nother dimension to
That's
it.
right.
There is at the there are remnants in the Ohio earthworks at the confluence of the Muskingum River with the Ohio River at Marietta, Ohio.
Yes.
There's an example of these, what they were called the Sacravia by Dyer and Davis, the Sacred Ways. And it's an interesting, they're describing a number of these. Here's one they're talking about from their work back in I believe 1848, when they did the surveys of the still extant mound structures in the U.S.
That's right.
They said there's a singular class of earthworks occurring at various points which seem to better to come up to the utilitarian standard of our day than any other. These are graded ways. Then he goes on to describe one of the most remarkable is about 1 mile below Pike County in the state of Ohio. It consists of a graded ascent from the 2nd to 3rd river terrace, and the way is 1,080 feet long by 215 feet wide. So, of course, we noticed the coincidence of that number again that we had referred to earlier. And I'm going to try to hold up a graphic here of what.
Well, I think it looks like we're paused out there again. But this too, I think the connectivity of these ideas comes back to the idea of consciousness as well, and how we can, these ideas can change. Because you look at the straight line, the ideas of the straight lines and the curves, then you look at something like the Ars Memoria and Ars Combinatoria, of lull and that, and it uses the same kind of concepts, integrating with the way that our minds process information,
Yeah.
I think we can show this image here now. This is showing what the Sacravia at Marietta, and what we're seeing in that image is basically that the Sacred Way aligns with the winter solstice sunset when that photograph was taken. We certainly find in the Chacoan alignments the importance of the moon. In fact, in both the Hopewellian and the Chacoan system, we find the importance of lunar alignments, which is quite interesting. I mean, they were able, by means of these alignments, to plot extremely precise astronomical observations of the motions of celestial bodies.
Yeah, that's true. Also, if you go to the ancient Maya, for example, they're sack bays, they're straight ritual ceremonial roads that ran for many miles through dense jungle. Some of those have stellar alignments associated with them, and the Maya today say that these are physical roads that run through the jungle, linking their ceremonial cities, really linking the ball courts in the ceremonial cities. But they also say there are ones that run underground, and there are invisible sack bays that run through the air that are full of blood. And it's extraordinary systems of belief. But there's this there's this physical network of lines, and there is this invisible one that lives, if you like, within the cultural or the folk mind. Very good example of this is in Arizona, and I'm trying to think of Tempe. There's a hill now got a water tower on it, but about a century or so ago, an Indian guy told the ethnographers that there's a cave, which there is incidentally in the side of this thing, this mesa, and he went up there as a young man and met a spirit who gave him a yellow cigarette which he smoked, and he smoked this stuff, and he had an out-of-body experience, he said, and he went along these spider webs that were taut straight that linked to the next mesa and another one and another one, and ultimately led to the San Francisco peaks. And what he described was something like the Nazca lines, only in thin air, linking these places along which the spirit could go. And that, as I say, was ethnology from about 100 years ago. So this idea of a virtual straight line network linking places of sanctity, venerated places, goes back through all the ages, so it would seem, in just about every culture, and it manifests in different forms, physically and virtually.
I think we've reached 4:18, so we're going to have to go to a Q&A, which I say unfortunately, it's fortunate to have the Q&A, but this is great, so we could probably sit here all day and listen and learn. So I guess Jonathan is going to moderate the Q&A and bring those questions forward. What do we have up first, Jonathan?
Yes. Hi, guys. First up, we have Cheryl, who's actually under the panelist list with us. I'm going to unmute you. Cheryl, are you there?
Yeah.
Oh. Cheryl, are you there? We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Cool. You can hear me? Then fine.
If you want to click the button that's to the left of the microphone button, that'll activate your webcam as well.
Okay. I tried that. It doesn't work. So yeah, I just didn't know if it was working. All right. Cool. The questions that I have, first one relates to Chartres Cathedral. Recently watched a documentary that related all the cathedrals in France to the constellation of Virgo. And if they could comment on the relationship of those sacred sites to different constellations, like the Giza Plateau to Orion, and some say that the Angkor Wat in Cambodia is linked to the constellation of Draco. So that's my first part of the question. And the second part is if you could discuss the Earth grid of Buckminster Fuller and how that relates to use of energy in energy generation and things like that.
Well, I'll go to that first question, if I may. The Angkor Wat account is flawed. It's not real, because that pattern is drawn out of an insufficient number of the many, many temples that are there. There was a BBC program that showed the falsity of that claim. And I can't tell you the number of times people have said, oh, well, look, if you look at the Bronze Age mounds on Salisbury Plain, they form the figure of the plough and so on. So what I would say is to be very, very careful that you're not being selective in the sites one chooses to make these patterns. You have to take them all into account and see if there is a coherent pattern amongst them. But it's very contentious, and one has to be very careful because the human, like looking at the stars, it's very easy to make patterns. People did do that. But some of these have been shown not to be authentic. So we have to be careful when we're looking at patterns. It's the nature of the human mind to form patterns very swiftly.
I agree with Paul. There are some rather unusual relationships, though, that we can show, and I just have an example of one that I might show you here. And if we can see this, I don't know how well, is this showing up on the?
Yeah, that's okay.
Can we see it? Okay, I'm going to, this is one of the mounds. This is Shiloh Mound in Tennessee. It's a complex. Cameron, would you hold this for me while I do this? And here is the pattern of the mounds on the ground. If you can see this, let's see back. What's that? Okay, this is not. It's reflecting too much. It's reflecting, but that's the pattern of the mounds. Now watch carefully. See that? And here it's not showing up that great, but let's go back and forth between the Pleiades and the mounds themselves. It's very suggestive. We certainly know that the American Indians revered the Pleiades. I could put this up on my website and so you could maybe see it with a little bit more accuracy. There seems to be a number of these very, very close. I mean, it's not exact, but it's very close to the layout of the mound structures. You know, one could question really what was the basis of this. I think you brought up the subject of the cathedrals in France, and there is a similar. I mean, it's a close. It is rather close to the actual pattern, but again, it's not exact. But of course, the stars have moved over time. So, you know, to me, it's one of those things that bears more research. I was familiar with the Orion alignments of the belt. That seems pretty accurate to me. I mean, it seems like a pretty solid case has been made for that. Although I haven't gone in to look at it in the depth that maybe would be required to support it or refute it. But
yeah, the thing about the Orions, you're talking about the pyramids.
Yes.
Yeah, well, there's so many. Do you know how many pyramids there are on that plateau? Hell of a lot.
A lot.
And so I think if you've got a few sites that form a pattern that is recognizable, then you're looking at some sort of deliberation, as you've just shown at Shiloh. But when there are a lot of sites, to draw a pattern out of it is, as we might say over here, a little bit dodgy. And it speaks of preferential viewing of something. But there is no doubt that people did put down, in limited areas, monuments that do mimic the layout of certain constellations. And that might be true of the French cathedrals. I just don't know if all the cathedrals are involved in that or not.
Well, I think it's primarily the cathedrals that are the Notre Dame cathedrals. And I actually have a list of those here. I think this is, I don't know how clearly this is going to show up, but I have a map of those cathedrals right here. And I don't know if that's showing up or not because I'm looking at basically a thumbnail on my screen. But then if I do this is the pattern of the constellation of Virgo, and it's a pretty close match actually. But again, it's not exact. There's some variation, and you know whether the question in my mind was that deliberate or is there something else going on when they lay out these cathedrals dedicated to the Virgin? The fact that they approximate, and I use the word approximate, the pattern of the associated stars of Virgo in the sky. I just don't know. But
well, sorry, go on.
Well, when you look at these things, again, you don't see, it's not as precise as we would probably achieve if we were attempting to do it with modern technology, to create an effigy of constellations in the landscape.
Oh, I think that's fair enough, yes. That's fair enough. If all the sites are being taken into account, that's the criterion you have to stick with. But certainly it's possible. I mean, for example, the Germans, I know it's true in Germany. I don't know about other countries. It might be other countries, but in Germany, when the Christians laid out their churches, they laid them out in patterns across a city. So you would have, say, a cross. So you'd have the dome, the cathedral in the center, but outlying churches making a cross linked to the ground plan of the cathedral. And that was definitely deliberately laid out imagery to imprint an area with whatever the significance of a particular symbol might be. So that would make sense in the case of these cathedrals, if there was a link to a dedication, for example.
And then the other question too, bringing Buckminster Fuller into it, I think points to the fact that these things are possible in the future as well. You know, like Paul, what you were talking about, and well, and Randall too. I mean, this quest for these ideas in moving into the past and finding these kind of relationships. You know, we can bring that into what we do now. You know, I mean, in terms of, you think of these spirit road ideas. I mean, we've got the internet right now. We're kind of interacting in these strange straight lines of information going back and forth. You know? And the folk mind, as you talked, I mean, we're cultivating the folk mind of our time, you know, and giving access and keys to these ideas so that artists and musicians and all that can go into their work and bring it out, you know.
Well, the sort of knowledge we're looking at is perennial.
Right.
Perennial means it's beyond, it doesn't belong to any age, any time, or even any place necessarily. So it's a perennial knowledge.
Right.
What Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy.
And it seems like each culture adapts it to its own requirements.
Yeah. Colors it, yeah.
Colors it, yes. But it certainly is ubiquitous through history. We find it all over the world, pretty much, you know, resurfacing repeatedly through history. So it's been something that wasn't just an anomaly with one time or place. It's been very universal.
Oh no, because it is so fundamental.
And it's interesting that we're having this conversation now, and that for a generation or two, we've been sort of in the midst of this revival of this kind of information, this lost knowledge. And it's interesting to speculate where it could go, what forms it could manifest in terms of our own cultural requirements and where we're going for the future. Because we certainly have access to tremendous amounts of information and knowledge that even, you know, a couple of generations ago was not available to people. And we now have the means of communicating this knowledge instantaneously around the planet. So no telling where we could go with this.
Thank you guys. That was
We have
a
another
great question, Cheryl. Thank you so much. Up next we have Jay Paul. Are you there?
But yeah, wonderful conversation. I really enjoy the dialogue and the discovery in terms of where this might lead. First, I just wanted to say is that there was a major crop circle that appeared in Chillicothe last fall at the end of the Great Hopewell Road. You can find the information on earthfiles.com, which had a lot of sacred geometry in it. But the question I was wondering is who initiated St. Bernard, that is the architect of Chartres? In other words, how did he pick up this, you know, because there is almost a millennia between he and the Pythagoreans. And again, how are they tapping into this, and how deep, the question I guess is how deep does sacred geometry go, and when does it reach the great cloud of the unknowing?
Well, as I indicated earlier, you can find something like Charlemagne's octagonal cathedral, chapel rather, in between Chartres and Pythagoras. I mean, I don't think it ever was lost. I mean, I think the message, the information was passed on through bands of initiates. So we don't know how far back it went, but without doubt the knowledge was there. And there is, I mean, Charpentier speculated that when the West went into the Middle East with its adventures, it picked up a lot of information that came back and revivified existing fragments of knowledge in the West. And that's why the Gothic cathedral genre, if you like, suddenly erupted shortly after the Crusades. And so it's possible that there was a bit of cross-fertilization going on, but certainly I don't think the knowledge was ever completely lost. Somebody like Alcuin in the 7th, 8th century had the knowledge for sure. He was a monk, but as we know, the monks picked up earlier information back through into pagan times and back into Iron Age and prehistoric times. So I think there was a golden thread, if you like, that was always there.
But are they possibly tapping into the Akashic field in terms of, might these be patterns within the void, so to speak? I mean, are these universal patterns throughout the cosmos?
Well, the sacred geometry is universal, yeah. It is the inherent geometry that moves the heavens, moves the stars, moves the planets, grows the plants. It's and the human beings and all the structures you see and the behavior of light and the motion of atoms. All that is sacred geometry, and it's inherent in the way that the axis of a spinning sphere is inherent. If you can't actually get hold of it, but it's there. And so,
but you can hear it, the sounds of Chaco Canyon, the acoustics. It seems like you have to listen. You have to be passive to listen to it. You can't actively conceive it.
Well, there is a curved rock in Chaco Canyon, a large area of curved rock, and I can't remember the name that the Anasazi gave it, but it means I run a journal, an academic journal called Time and Mind, and we have a whole major study of this curved rock. It means, the translation is the curved rock that speaks, and it's got specific echo properties that project into the canyon. And so there's no doubt, you're right, the acoustics are remarkable there.
Randall or David, do you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Sure. I think that it's both. I think there's a transmitted lineage of information and knowledge, but it also resides within the human subconscious. And there are periods that are auspiciously promote the bringing of this information back into consciousness again. One of the things I've come to the conclusion regarding like ritual, particularly the ones that I have become familiar with through my Masonic affiliations, is that it seems like certain rituals are designed to, if you will, reactivate this kind of knowledge and bring it back from the subconscious level back to the conscious level. But I think it's a combination of both. I think that under the right circumstances, with the right stimuli coming from the environment, whether it's through the form of a ritual or through the form of an experience that one has in a sacred site, that it reactivates this awareness on a fundamental level. At the same time, I also get the impression that there is a conscious lineage that's probably gone unbroken. We can certainly see that there is, coming from the time of the Greeks, we had the Eleusinian mysteries, and we can trace the transmission from the Eleusinian mysteries through the Islamic alchemists, and from the Islamic alchemists through the Sufis, and probably through the Sufis to the Templars and the Crusaders and so forth, that may have brought it back to Europe, the sacred doctrines. On the other hand, we also had Mithraism in Roman times that seemed to have a very powerful system of encoding sacred information. And we can see connections between the Mithrists and the Essenes, between the Essenes and the Gnostics. And then between these groups and a group called the Comachines, who I think helped us bridge that period of time from the fall of the Roman Empire through the time of Charlemagne and right up to the Gothic period. So I think it'd be a very interesting study, and maybe somebody has done this already, to really try to intricately trace these connections. I don't know if it's possible to actually, at this point, trace these connections in an unbroken line.
Peter Kingsley's work is pretty good.
That there have been these institutions or brotherhoods, what have you, that have served the purpose of transmitting this sacred doctrine.
Peter Kingsley has done some research into that, tying the alchemical ideas to Sufism and and then going back to Parmenides and tracing that lineage. So he's done a lot of work in that, and he's gotten more personal with it as well. So he's been able to experience, what he's talking about with those ideas. And I think that it's really interesting because with this idea of the cloud of unknowing and the kind of negative theology, you also have orthodox, semi-orthodox, like Pseudo-Dionysus, and the ladders of ascent material from the kind of Neoplatonic mixing of Catholicism, where these ideas start to come out as what concept of the ladder of ascent and those more ratio-based ideas, but then eventually reaching a point of what in Kabbalah would be Ein Sof. So I think that's, and one of the people working with that idea right now and combining the two is David Hyman Smith. So I would highly recommend checking out his work. He's a Kabbalist in Brooklyn that's doing some pretty amazing both the concepts of cloud of unknowing and that negative theology element, but also doing really heavy work with the geometries. So that's an interesting way to kind of study that. And he's studied pretty far afield, so he has a good basis cross-culturally.
All really, really great things. Thank you, J. Paul, for those questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Up next is our own tech guy, Jeremy. Are you there? Jeremy? Oh, well, I've activated your webcam too if you want to reactivate that.
Okay, sure. Hey guys. So this is sort of a general question for Randall. I actually have two questions. Randall, you mentioned earlier that you and Paul were kind of getting into studying these subjects around the same time, and do you feel that now, in our time, 2013, 2012, there's a resurgence of interest in these topics and a kind of resurgence of relevance for them? That was my first question.
The answer would be an unequivocal yes. The very fact that we're here doing this, I think, is indicative of the fact that people are becoming interested in it again. Seemed like there was a large upsurge in ideas having to do with the mystical, having to do with sacred science, back late 60s, early 70s, and I've seen it kind of ebb and flow since then. But certainly it does seem now that just as the whole situation on the planet and moves to this, what appears to be sort of a critical mass in some respects, I think it's absolutely necessary that we reconnect with some of these perennial traditions. And I think that we would benefit immensely and advance as a society, as an emerging planetary society, by accessing this kind of information. I've been convinced for a long time that, that these are principles that can inculcate harmony amongst people, and that was one of the functions. Also, to bring people into an awareness of this greater matrix of reality, if you will, in which we move and have our being. That there are bigger forces at work, very creative forces, but also destructive forces that if we ignore, it's going to be to our own detriment. And we certainly live in an environment that I think now could be considered cosmic. And I think we're kind of moving towards a realization that there's a cosmic ecology at work here that our ancestors were aware of, that we've kind of forgotten and come back to basically through science. And I've always, in Paul's work, always appreciated the fact that he's emphasized the importance of science and not abandoning the rational mind in all of this. And there has been a tendency to kind of gravitate towards pseudoscience and things that cannot be verified. And many of these things can serve as distractions and take us off on tangents, I think. There's no reason to abandon good science. There's no reason to abandon human reason. This is always, whenever somebody set out on the occult path in the past, they were always taught that you have to have the four tools or the four weapons of the magician, one of which is the sword of reason. Because if you're going to venture into the jungle of metaphysics, you absolutely are going to require that sword to clear the pathway. Otherwise, you're going to step into some deep quicksand. And there has been a tendency to abandon, because science has kind of brought upon itself kind of given itself a black eye because of some of the things that it's done. But I think Paul has said you have to distinguish between good science, which is basically just innate curiosity about how the world works, and technological applications of that information. It may only exist to serve a political agenda or whatever. But I definitely, in answer to your question, think that we're moving towards a revival, a resurrection of some of this lost knowledge. Where it's going to lead in the 21st century is anybody's guess. I have some speculation on that, but I think that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So.
Great. And my follow-up question, sort of on a smaller scale, for everybody really, all of the panelists today. I'm thinking, because I live in Titusville, Florida, and a couple of years back, I don't know, in the 90s, they discovered a couple of burial sites here. And as we were going through all of these spirit roads, I was wondering how many, forgotten and neglected spirit roads there are, because in our culture, we don't really pay much attention to anything energetically speaking. We just sort of pave everything over with car parks and Walmarts, and we have plenty of straight lines everywhere. I mean, suburbs are grids. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if there's any tangible or concrete examples you guys could give of sort of just forgotten ley lines that now exist in very urbanized or suburban areas, especially in North America.
The example I gave earlier of Marietta, Ohio, that particular example, that city, where I showed the Sacred Way, if you actually look at a map, it's very interesting that you'll find that roads are actually built now over the alignments. And let me see if I can pull this up. Maybe Paul would have a comment to make while I'm pulling this up, and I'm going to give you a
well, I visited Marietta. The Sacra Via is a red paved road, red bricked, the road system. Even in Britain here, the corpseways, which are physical features, nobody really knows, only a handful of people really knows what they really were. And sometimes they walk them as recreational paths without knowing what they were. And many have just grown over, disappeared, and we've been tracing some of those. But don't use the word ley lines, please. It doesn't mean anything anymore, and it gives ley line, the whole thing came out of a New Age mishmash. And you've got two sides of a coin, a bad coin. You've got scientism on one hand that's totally materialistic, and you've got New Age waffle on the other end. And I always feel guilty for my generation in that we had a tremendous revolution of consciousness in the 1960s, and we knew we were on the threshold of amazing things. But something happened that we petered away, and we dissolved it into wishful thinking and into fantasy ideas that got projected onto things rather than us drawing the information from them. And we invent the pasts we want rather than trying to hear what the ancestors are actually telling us. And so there's been a very thin line, and in the meantime, the corporations took over. They bought the political systems. The wars occurred, more wars that we thought would never happen again, and so on. And we allowed that to happen because we took our eye off the actual ball and drifted off into fantasy land. The other shinier coin is the one where there's real science on one side, and science only means to know, that's all it means, and not scientism, which is just materialism dressed up. There's true science, the real investigative science into the nature of the world and ourselves. And the other side of that coin is the sword of reason that Randall mentions. It's into the metaphysics without losing your compass. Because the people who built Stonehenge weren't wafflers. The people who built the pyramid were very exact people. And the people who built the Egyptian temples or any of these things had the sword of reason to do it. But they were serving, if you like, metaphysical purposes. But they didn't go off into la-la land, otherwise they wouldn't have built these things. So I think it's terribly important we understand. So, but what Jeremy says is right. People are covering the world over with concrete and God knows what else. And a lot of things are not seen. And increasingly, one of the concerns, the digital age is wonderful. We can do things like this. But another thing I notice in the digital age is people are less here and now. They've got things in their ears. They're fiddling with their iPhones. They're not present on the earth. Sat-nav, satellite navigation systems. Most people no longer know the terrain they're traveling through. They're just following this electronic voice and mapper. And they don't know what's on either side or what's deeper in the ground. And we are becoming very abstracted from our physical, natural world. And most people know about it through a television set or whatever. So I think there is a tremendous danger inherent. We're covering over a lot of things. Jeremy's quite right. But as Randall also says in a more hopeful vein, there is this resurgence of inquiry and investigation. I just hope it doesn't go off into another phase of la-la land that we had after the 1960s. I just hope that we can keep the sword of reason here while not losing the metaphysics, the spiritual as well. It's a sharp balance. That coin has to be on its edge all the time.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for those great questions. Up next, we have Harlan. Are you there, Harlan?
Is my mic on? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. So, well, great. Thanks so much for everyone being here, sharing all this information. I came to this information, formative book I posted in the chat is John Michel's New View over Atlantis, which I read shortly after it came out in the early 80s. And another really great book I wanted to mention, which really is a collection of a lot of essays called The Anti-Gravity and the World Grid, which I also read when it came out in 1987. I think it's still in print, and excellent books on commending a lot of information about this idea of the Earth having this geometric grid of energy. And so my question relates to a shape that I just learned of through Drunvalo Melchizedek, which we also haven't mentioned. And he did this video called Birth of a New Humanity, which I watched in January of 2011. And he mentioned this shape here. Let's see if I can bring it up. It's a rhombic triacantahedron, which is this 30, I'm putting the wrong side, over here, 30 golden ratio rhombuses. When you cross them, the golden ratio is the diagonal. The short diagonal to the long diagonal is in perfect golden ratio. And when you connect all the short ones, it makes the dodecahedron right there. And then the icosahedron, when you join the long ones, they actually have these models of it made up of this. This is just the icosahedron, dodecahedron in golden ratio. And so I've been working extensively with this shape. Drunvalo mentioned that this is a shape that the Earth's vibrational energy body is evolving to hold this new consciousness frequency. And when I build this shape and bring it around, when I first debuted this shape, I made it in, let's see, I got a model of the portal. I made this big, I've been building these different portals, like for Burning Man, strange geometrical things you can sit inside of since 2004. Well, this was debuted in 2012, January in Australia, at a festival called Rainbow Serpent. And this is the full rhombic triaconthahedron, but the inside panels were crossed to show that other dodecahedron and icosahedron. There were two other major structures at this festival built with that same geometry. And I go around and I'm seeing this geometry popping up all over the place and people referring to it as this new Earth grid. So it seems like, you know, there's something significant. So I wanted to bring that up and then ask, of course, Paul and Randall what their comments are on this golden ratio icosahedron dodecahedron that I've become fascinated with sharing with other people as an experience. So that's basically my question, to comment on this this dual shape that comes from the rhombic triaconthahedron. Thank you.
Paul, do you want to try it?
Randall, off you go.
Well, with so much in geometry as Harlan is doing there, he's holding up visuals and models and so forth. I've worked extensively over the years with studying the nesting relationships between the various Platonic solids and the semi-regular Archimedean solids. And that's one that I've come across in the course of working with that. On our Sacred Geometry website, we're going to attempt in the near future to put up some animations, three-dimensional animations that graphically display some of these nesting relationships. Cameron, I think we lost it here.
Here, Randall, we can hear you. We can see you.
Okay, good.
You're still on. You're still on.
Still on,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And so that's about really all I could say from that, other than the fact that when you do start studying these nesting relationships, what you discover is the ubiquitousness of the golden section throughout the whole process. And there's actually a very dynamic process, and I've done an animation to show this, to try to show the relationships between the various solids. And I might be able to actually run it a little bit here, where you can actually see. Let's see if this is going to work. It may not work, but let's see. Here we go. Here we go. We are doing we start with a golden rectangle, and then by translating that golden rectangle along to the XYZ coordinate axis, you see what we are creating there? I don't know if you can see this too well. Okay, but it's showing up as an icosahedron, and we can go from there to showing these nesting relationships. From the icosahedron, we can see it's nested within an octahedron, and we can see that the octahedron here would be nested in the star tetrahedron pattern, and that in turn will give rise to the hexahedron or cube. And then from the cube, we enclose that in a dodecahedron by projecting golden rectangles off of each side. And then from the dodecahedron, we can come back to our starting point. This is different. We'll have this posted on our website very soon, so people will be able to run it through and study these relationships for themselves. But essentially what that was showing was that you start with the golden section, you start with three golden rectangles, you place them at mutual right angles along XYZ axes, and from there you can generate each of the solids, starting with the icosahedron. There's a nesting sequence that takes you through the whole process, brings you back to the icosahedron, and it essentially is infinite in both directions, both in the diminishing scale and the expanding scale. And then, of course, from those, by truncating certain vertices of each of the objects, we generate the semi-regular Archimedean solids. The best way to understand this is like, as I'm attempting here through a series of animations. And give us a little time, and we're going to have some of those posted on the website. So if you check back from time to time, hopefully you'll be seeing some of that up there. And you may find the interesting links between the form that you're working with there, Harlan, and the whole other family of Platonic and Archimedean solids.
Yeah, I just chip in a word about the planetary grids. I think in this information age, we have to be very, very careful about the provenance of information.
Yes.
And that the grid is something I went into back in the 70s. Chris Bird did a lot to promulgate it. It originated in Russia, and he brought that out. And then it given a new lift in the 1990s by a couple of people in Chicago who I know, very nice people, and they produced the grid that got very popularized it really. But I questioned them, some of the lines were 90 miles wide that form this grid, and I said, what is that 90 miles of? And in the end, they admitted it was just really an idea. And I think we have to be very careful that some things are ideas, interesting, some are ideas not interesting, and some things are real, are actual. And I think the planetary grid thing doesn't hold up to inspection when you really get into it. But it's something that grabs the imagination, of course.
I think that I should interject here that Paul's work on the distribution of fault lines throughout the course, throughout the lithosphere may be a more productive way to go with that. Because here we have a tangible method, I think, of perhaps verifying whether or not there is actually anything going on energetically. Because certainly when we look at fault lines, we know from very well-founded work that things do happen along the fault lines of the planet. Energies are propagating. Paul, who are the authors of Space-Time Transients and Unusual Events?
That was Persinger, and yeah. In fact, I've been in touch with Persinger quite recently. Yeah, it's really a whole other area, but you're quite right. We found in England, we only surveyed it for England, there's stone circles, not standing stones randomly, but stone circles always fell on or immediately adjacent to fault lines. And fault lines are places, as Randall says, where unusual energetic phenomena are frequently reported, particularly unusual plasma effects, luminescent effects. There's big work going on in Norway on that. And the recent couple of years ago, there was an earthquake in Italy that was fabulously well reported and recorded and investigated. And there was actually photographs of balls of light flying down valleys prior to the actual earthquake. And they mapped that with the fault lines and so forth. I won't go into that. I've written again on this in 2 books and many articles. But I'll give you one case. In 1919, an engineer was walking in the hill walking in the Lake District in northwest England, and he and a colleague, and they passed the Castlereagh Stone Circle, and they were coming home from being out on the mountains back to their hotel, and it was getting twilight, and they passed the Castlereagh Stone Circle, and they saw these balls of light moving to and fro over the stone circle. And the balls of light were about 6 feet across, and one of them broke away and silently rolled across the field towards where they were standing. Scared the hell out of them. But the thing just popped out, it just disappeared. But he later wondered in an engineering journal, funnily enough, in 1919, he said, is this something that happens there that people in the Stone Age saw and thought it was the spirits, thought it made the place sacred, and was that why they built their stone circle there? And we've done a lot of research on this and done some very detailed mapping of megaliths and fault lines in the areas where we had enough data. And it's the connection looks pretty strong, and as does the connection with these type of unusual phenomena.
Yes, and I might mention that some of the largest earthwork complexes in the Mississippi Valley, Cahokia is a good example, essentially lie right over the New Madrid Fault.
Yeah.
So, which is
very active. Gave a very powerful earthquake. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And in Persinger's work, basically they demonstrated that the forces generated along fault lines can trigger all kinds of interesting consequences, ionization, into manifesting invisible luminosities. They hypothesized that certain structures associated with the fault lines could damp or amplify these effects. So I think that there is some science out there that would actually be demonstrable from the standpoint rather than just a purely hypothetical idea. And
yes.
I think that it would be along those lines of studying the patterns of actually getting into a study of the structure of the lithosphere itself and the movement of underground water, which of course is going to tend to follow the lines of least resistance, which are going to be the fault lines in the crust. The disposition of ore bodies within the fault lines.
Yes, metals in the ground are very important. Yeah,
exactly.
In fact, in 1910, you've just made me think of this. In 1910, we found information about a copper mine, the Beer Alston mine, which is on the border between Cornwall and Devon, and we found a record that showed that they prospected for copper veins by looking for lights coming out of the ground. It was a form of prospecting. So it's well attested, and the nature of the lights are also fascinating. I think they're macro-quantal events, but that's another story. I've written on this, as I say, and if you go on to what I hope they'll put up as my website as well, you'll be able to get through to some of those books.
Thank you guys so much for that. It is at the end of our session for today, so I wanted to pass it over to Paul and Randall again for any closing remarks.
Go ahead, Randall. You go.
Well, I've mentioned specifically my website, or our website, is sacredgeometryinternational.com, and like I said, I'm going to be posting information up there, and there'll be a lot of new written essays and stuff going up soon, and probably some stuff inspired by these talks that we've had today and last week. We didn't get to talk as much about the geological end of this as I would like. We're kind of getting into it here at the end, because they're just we didn't get to talk about something that fascinates me to a great deal, which is the interaction between Earth and the cosmos in the form of the great impact structures and astrobleeds, which actually I think might be largely responsible for creating the pattern of fault lines that we see in the Earth's structure. And there was a couple of these patterns, like through the Midwest, that appear to have some very unique properties associated with them. I think, Paul, you're aware of the fact that Serpent Mound was built on the rim of an ancient astrobleed, right?
That's right.
Haven't you written on that?
Yes, I've written. It was. They think it was actually a collapsed volcano.
Well, I think the most recent research suggested it is in fact an astrobleed. I think they found shocked quartz there and several of the other proxies that would suggest that it was, something from outside. It was exogenic rather than endogenic.
Yeah.
But in either case, it's a very unique structure.
It's a unique structure on which they chose to put their effigy. Yeah.
Yes.
We can't keep ignoring this. There was clearly, look,
clearly.
if in the Amazon, for example, people, the indigenous people know what every plant, every leaf, every mushroom does, how it can be used. People were just as sensitive to their geological surroundings as they were to their botanical surroundings in the past. I'm quite sure of that. And these are all avenues we can take. But I just say I've enjoyed the talk and the chat. I hope other people have as well. You barely touch on things in a couple of hours, of course, but at least they're thoughts for people to hopefully follow through on.
One quick question that came up was the 4 tools of the magician, Randall. What was the exact tools? We had the sword of reason and...
well, the pantacle, which was usually a disc-shaped object, sometimes with inscriptions on it that represented the physical body.
And you're referencing the weight deck.
The what?
You're referencing the weight tarot deck, right? The magician card?
Sure.
That has the symbols on?
Or any of the Western occult traditions,
Right.
you're looking, the Golden Dawn, or, and then the wand, which was associated with intuition, basically the will, and then the cup, which was associated with emotion. So each of those 4 implements would be sitting on the table of the magician, the magus, about to undertake the occult work. So they were considered that all 4 were absolutely necessary to a successful completion of the great work.
Right.
And they have their counterparts in the 4 suits of the tarot, the 4 ages of the world, the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, etc., and so on.
Excellent.
But I just wanted to emphasize the use of the sword of reason for the simple reason that it seems to have been sheathed, if you will, and it's time to draw it forth again. And
No.
yeah,
Agreed. Definitely agreed. Well, thank you guys. I mean, this has been great. I hope I've enjoyed it. Both of the sessions that we've had so far. I'm learning a ton. Paul, thank you so much for coming on. Randall, thank you for coming on and joining in this conversation, because this has been fantastic, and I hope that I just hope that we can all, I don't know, I mean, if we can take this stuff and go forward with it. I mean, we've got so many creative people, and there's a bunch of artists that have joined us for this, and we've got people that really could take these ideas forward. So it's really cool to see everybody, have you guys present the information, have the conversations going in the chat. And we've got that Facebook group. There's, Sacred Geometry International has a Facebook group as well. So the interactions can continue, and we can make this a reality. The question of if we're poised at the right time, well, the conversation's happening now. We have groups like Evolver, Reality Sandwich, the Open Center in New York. There's a bunch of different organizations, Sacred Geometry International, what Paul's doing, in connection with some of the universities. Global consciousness projects going on. They're starting to integrate with Burning Man. There's so much going on right now that people can have access to and really bring this stuff forward and build a society that, whether or not these alignments were in place in the past, part of this is that they're possible to be, so it's rediscovering the future and the past and bringing that together. So hopefully we can continue to do that. And I'm looking forward to the next couple sessions here.
Well said. Very nice. Thank you so much, David.
Okay, I think we all need to get together at some point and have a big party.
Absolutely.
Good.
I can tell that Paul's probably a fun guy to party with. So.
Well, right now
he probably was back in his day.
Well, I was in my day. Yeah. It's also late in the evening here, so I'm going to crush away now.
All right.
I really enjoyed it, and thank you all very much.
Good night, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Sleep well.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in, and we all look forward to next week's session. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you guys, and sorry about the tech problems on my end and the squeaking. I'll try not to be a mouse next time. We'll get that fixed.
Don't worry about it.
I think it's my hard drive, actually, so that's even more worrisome. You're hearing